everyone, welcome to another Book Review Wednesday, and today I'm going to be briefly discussing The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. I apologize I had to delay this video up until today. Unfortunately, I wanted to finish this book and still have my brain intact, so I didn't get done with it until the end of today. But I am done with it, and so now I can really dive in and discuss it. But basically, The Jungle is actually really interesting as far as its impact within the United States. This was written around the early 1900s when we sort of had the first kind of wave of mass immigration from various different European countries mostly. And as a result, there was a lot of industries sort of popping up. And one of them was based within meat. And this is sort of what the book at least tries to talk about, since specifically that industry is one that is sort of really been enhanced by the commentary that's sort of made within this book as far as the conditions are concerned. But basically it is fictional, so it does follow that format, but again it addresses sort of these real life concerns that at least a lot of people were having, at least during the time period. So basically the main character of the story is named Jurgis Rutkus, and he's from Lithuania, and he ends up moving to the United States to hopefully make a better life for him and his wife. Unfortunately, things go south, like really, really south, and it is pretty depressing. I mean, if you go through this story, it is pretty sad what Jurgis has to go through. He has many trials and tribulations and unfortunate circumstances that end up happening to him and the people around him. And you really do see how this puts a huge weight on him, and how people, at least back in those times, at least had a sort of more, I guess, less pleasant work environment, and a more, I think, kind of hostile and very demeaning kind of work environment. And you'll sort of see this again. It explains vividly within the book, like the horrible and unsanitary ways in which the meat industry sort of produces the meat. And you'll see how Jurgis's character sort of goes through that. He also does fertilizer, I believe, at one point, and that ends up causing a lot of problems because you know, when you inhale the fertilizer, it's really not good for you. So again, these were really back-breaking, horrible, and very dirty type jobs. Even the dirty type jobs that we see nowadays, which again, there can be said there are some problems maybe there within certain industries, but when you look at how it was back then, it seems to be like these kinds of conditions were a lot more common and a lot more of a bigger problem. And eventually, due to Jurgis kind of sort of being destitute at one point and feeling really down on his capabilities, he sort of joins this political movement, and it's not really until sort of the way end and to where it sort of talks about that kind of transition or focus within his life that he makes. Again, although I don't agree necessarily with the political movement in and of itself, I can sort of understand why people felt the way that they did and how they thought that this in particular political movement would provide some kind of answers for them. And so again, I think that's the important thing to kind of understand. And the interesting thing is again, there were actually various laws that were made by the concerns that were brought up within this book. And it was sort of supposed to be to bring about general awareness as far as the poor working conditions of that time period. And I think that's really the essence and the part of the book that I think is more so important than really the kind of political stuff that the author tries to hash in at the way end of the book. So again, obviously, he did have some sort of, even the author himself did have some influence within this sort of political movement. But again, I think the overall message of bringing awareness to these issues is, I think, something that's more so important, and I think more so the primary focus of the story, even though, again, the author tries to put in his own ideological spin on certain things towards the way in. But I think that's really all I can say about this story without really giving too much away. I think it's definitely interesting, and again, regardless of where you stand as far as the economics on the whole way in which labor was orchestrated within the early 1900s America, you'll kind of get a real sense of the struggle and how it wasn't all that rosy coming over here in the United States and trying to make a living from, coming over and early here. And my family experienced that firsthand because my great grandfather, he died because he worked in some kind of intensive labor, and they didn't have any safety precautions, and unfortunately he ended up dying. So again, I think to act like, oh, when we came over here, everything was, rosy and everybody had jobs, and everything was stable. I just think that that's just a fantasy. That's just not reality. And I think my family is the first, at least my family history is one to really show of this. So again, but that's just my personal thoughts. I'd be more than happy to hear what anybody else has to say in regards to this particular book, but I think that's ultimately all I can really say about it. And I believe I said it was my great-grandfather. It was my great-grandfather, not my grandpa. Great-grandpa. Because he came over, obviously, in the earlier 1900s. But yeah, I think that's really ultimately all I can say, though. But thank you so much for watching. Hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.